4 reasons why the spanking debate is so triggering for post-traumatic parents. Hi, I'm Dr. Robin Kozlowitz, YouTube's post-traumatic parenting expert. If you like this content and if you're curious about post-traumatic parenting, please click the subscribe button below. If you want to join the post-traumatic parenting community and interact with other post-traumatic parents, please check us out on Instagram. You can find us at Dr. Kozlowitz Psychology, and you can find us on Facebook and a Facebook group as well. You can also find the Post-Traumatic Parenting Podcast available wherever you get your podcasts. So post-traumatic parents very often have difficulty engaging in the debate around spanking. And there are some obvious reasons and some hidden reasons why spanking is such a triggering topic. So first, researchers at Harvard found that spanking children actually decreases the size of their brains, particularly areas in the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. Those are the areas of our brain that control emotion processing and that allow us to plan, problem solve, engage in critical thinking and logical reasoning. So these researchers found that kids who had been disciplined harshly in their childhood, in their adolescence, when they were put into a functional MRI machine and they were shown pictures of people having like facial expressions, neutral, bored, scared, sad, etc., the children who had been harshly disciplined had less connectivity between these brain regions, meaning that the emotion center of the brain and the planning and problem solving and critical thinking center of the brain, the part of your brain that we really want children to be using when they're in a high conflict, high stress situation, they're not connecting so well. And those areas are a little smaller. That's not a good thing. So post-traumatic parents very often have difficulty with this spanking debate for several reasons. First of all, many post-traumatic parents know what they don't want to do. We know how we don't want to parent, but we don't know what we want to do. So when you come from a family where spanking, harsh discipline, shaming, blaming, yelling was the way that children were disciplined, and then you're trying to be a more responsive parent and you want to use words and you think that spanking is off the table and you're not going to do it, but your family is kind of in your ear being like, well, then you're going to raise willful, disobedient children. And your family, complains about your children's behavior, comments that, how's that gentle parenting stuff working for you now when your kid is having a meltdown, etc. I would argue very well, but separate conversation. Those types of situations, it's very confusing because while you know that you don't want to spank, you don't necessarily have a well thought out, well planned response for what you're going to do instead. So I think what we need to know is, yes, spanking works in the sense that if you want to ensure instant obedience to someone, if you hit them, they're going to do it, right? This is just a no-brainer of how violence works, right? If someone walked into this room right now with a gun and told me to give them all the money in my purse, of course I'm going to do it. They haven't taught me anything. They certainly haven't made our relationship better. They haven't increased my skill, but they've gotten my compliance because gun in my face means I'm going to do what you want, right? And spanking works the same way. Sure, your kid's going to get in the car after you spank them, but does that make you a skillful parent? The skillful parent can validate the kid's emotions, can deal with the meltdown, can self-regulate and co-regulate to get the kid in the car. Right? Getting the kid in the car by spanking them takes no skill whatsoever. It's like a robber walking in here and putting the gun on me. Of course, I'm going to do what he wants, not because he's the world's greatest teacher or the world's greatest coach or the world's greatest behavior changer, but because he has a gun, right? So here is the answer to that. The answer to that is no, I am going to be a skillful parent. And what I'm going to do is talk to my kid. Yeah, it may take a little longer for me to get this child in the car. That is true. But the goal isn't getting home 5 minutes faster, right? The goal is teaching this child a skill. He's having a meltdown. He wants to stay at the playground, at the party, whatever. And I want to get him into the car. And I need to teach him how to handle that disappointment, because for the rest of his life, there are going to be disappointments, right? There are going to be ice cream cone disasters, and there are going to be friends who say you can't play with me, and there are going to be marks on tests that aren't what we hope for. There are going to be promotions you don't get. There are going to be colleges you don't get into. Sadly, disappointments happen. The world is going to provide my child with enough harshness. It's my job to teach my child to deal with big emotions when the big emotions come, right? And how am I going to do that? If I spank him into swallowing his big emotions and getting in the car anyway, I haven't taught him anything at all. So that's the answer, right? Because so many post-traumatic parents, reason one that post-traumatic parents have a hard time with the whole spanking debate is simply because although we know what we don't want to do, we don't always know what we want to do. Very often also we're having this debate with authority figures, older people who have already raised children, whereas we're in the trenches raising them. So they're like, well, oh, I raised 5 kids and they're adults now. And, where it's like, you don't have that necessarily that proof of concept. But that doesn't mean that it's not that these techniques are not valid just because you don't have the proof of concept. One day you will have that proof of concept. Right now, what you have is parenting consistently with your values. So that is reason number one. Reason number two that the spanking debate gets so big in post-traumatic parents' minds is that when we think about coercive control, many of us have experienced coercive control in our life. Even when we're post-traumatic parents who weren't spanked, but we were shamed or blamed or criticized or ostracized or given a silent treatment, we feel so triggered at that sensation, at what that was like, what it felt like to feel so alone with stress, with pain, feeling like there's nobody in the world who cares, feeling like alone and like an unworthy human, right? Those feelings are horrible. So when we think about spanking and we think about how that child's going to feel in the moment after being spanked, then we just freeze up. So then it's very hard to have that debate and have that conversation with somebody else, because the concept of making a child feel that level of pain is so triggering for us that we sort of, our frontal lobes sort of go offline, because when we're triggered, that's what happens. And we don't even have the words to argue our case rationally. So if you want to direct Great Aunt Bertha to this video, go right ahead, because the argument against spanking is not just emotionally, I feel it's wrong. Scientifically, it's been demonstrated to be ineffective, to not teach skills, to shrink the parts of the child's brain that we are trying to raise. Those are the logical answers to that. But you have every right in the moment to feel triggered, to feel shamed all over again. Like as your child's having a meltdown and Great Aunt Bertha is advising you to just give him a couple of swats, and that's what she did with her kids, and you're indulging your kids and you're raising snowflakes. You're feeling shamed and blamed again. Of course, you're not going to be able to access logical reasoning to be able to explain what you're doing. No parent likes having their parenting be on trial. It is never fun. It's never fun when your kid's having that meltdown in the Target checkout aisle and everybody's staring at you and you feel like the worst mother in the world. Not that I've ever been there or anything, right? That's just the most horrific feeling. It doesn't feel good because our parenting is what we value so much. So when we feel our parenting being judged, then we really feel threatened, and it's hard to access logical reasoning in those moments. So like I said, show her this video. The third reason why the spanking debate is so difficult for post-traumatic parents is because we are such parenting perfectionists, because our trauma have made us such perfectionists, that when we're not engaging in any replacement strategies for parenting perfectly, so let's say we're trying to be gentle and responsive, and we're trying to remember that parenting script that we heard on a podcast that sounded so good, and we're trying to use all the right words and we're not quite getting them right, and no matter what we're saying, the kid is just yelling louder and it's not working. We judge ourselves a lot. We shame ourselves, we blame ourselves. And that's where that self-doubt comes in. And like, well, maybe Great Aunt Bertha's right. Oh my gosh, no, I would never hit my kid. But what do I do? Right. And we get into this tizzy because we're not doing it perfectly. And what we need to do is relax. We need to relax because we don't have to do it perfectly. The fact is that your kid having a meltdown when you're trying to get him into the car when he doesn't want to leave the park is good news. Because you know what that means? That means that child feels safe enough to have a big emotion around you. That child knows that it's not so dangerous to have a strong reaction to mom that they're not going to do it. That child's not stuffing down their emotions and quietly complying because it is way too dangerous to ever express an emotion around their parents. No, that child's having that meltdown because they feel safe enough to. Doesn't help in the moment, right? But that knowledge that that meltdown is proof you're a good parent. That meltdown is not proof that you're an incompetent parent, even if that shaming voice in your head is telling you that, and even if a physical voice in your life, like great Aunt Bertha, is telling you that. It's not true. The fact is, the test of good parenting is how calm and self regulated I stay in the face of my child's meltdown. My child melting down is just biological. The human brain can only take so much stress. Little brains can take very little stress, and then they melt down because they don't have the self regulation tools that we have. They don't have the ability, they don't have the prefrontal cortex functioning that we have, the planning ability to say, oh, yeah, I don't really want to yell so much in the park. My throat's going to hurt later, and it's not going to feel so yucky. Maybe mom's not going to be so willing to risk taking me to the park again. Yeah, I don't really want to do this, right? They don't have that function. They will obtain that function as they grow up, especially if we don't spank them, because how do they obtain that function? We need that prefrontal cortex to grow nice and big. We need that amygdala to be nice and connected so that our emotions and our prefrontal cortex talk to each other so that we can self-regulate, that we can have all the benefit of the richness our emotions give us, and also be able to plan and problem solve and engage in creative thinking and be engaged in critical thinking and being able to discuss it with someone else and resolve a conflict productively. We want that. Slapping the kid makes that prefrontal cortex smaller. So yeah, it stops the meltdown in the moment. But that meltdown is proof you're a good parent. Why do you want to stop it? You want to validate the child. You want to soothe them. You want to co-regulate with them. You want to help them because that teaches a skill, right? The fourth reason, and this is a little bit of a sneaky one, that post-traumatic parents have a hard time with the spanking debate has to do with a sneaking suspicion that many of us have that when we were children, if we were slapped, if we were hit, if we were shamed or blamed or criticized, it wasn't really about this educational imperative. It wasn't really necessarily about spare the rod and spoil the child. I had so many post-traumatic parents come to me and say, when my parents used to beat me and they would tell me they're doing it for the good of my good, for the good of my soul, because that's their job as a parent, they're doing it to educate me. One of the things I have to grieve now in adulthood is it really wasn't about me and educating me. It wasn't this tough love, this harsh way of showing me how much they care by, not sparing the rod and not spoiling the child. Actually, what it was about was they were stressed, they were angry, they needed to lash out, and I was a convenient receptacle for their stress. And coming to terms with that, that's a very painful thing to grieve and mourn. And when that happens in psychotherapy with me, we really have to sit with that thought and process it because that's a really sad and difficult thing to come to terms with. That even the most loving parent who's doing the best they can with the tools they have, and maybe they don't have tools other than spanking, that some of that tool was about stress management for the parent, and it really wasn't about educating the child. And coming to terms with that is hard. Fairbairn, one of the original object relations theorists, said that for a baby takes on the bad of the parent, meaning that it's very threatening for a baby to believe my mom is slapping me right now because she's stressed out. And she's, so to speak, the bad one in the situation. She's hitting me. She's the aggressor. I would much rather believe that my mom is loving and she has a plan and she's hitting me because I am so bad. And I deserve being hit. I deserve being hurt because I'm bad. And badness deserves to be punished. So the child takes in the bad. And part of therapy sometimes is saying, wait a minute, you're not bad. You never were. Your mom may have loved you, and it also wasn't okay when she hit you. And some of her hitting you may have been about her own stress management and not about because she just loved you enough that she needed to hit you because she needed to, hit the bad out of you. Some of that was about her own stress. Maybe that was an intergenerational cycle. It's what she was taught. She did not necessarily do that out of malice. right? And yet it was painful and it hurt. And processing that and mourning that can be really painful. It can be a turning point in psychotherapy. You were not bad. And anybody watching this who still is holding some sense of badness, I'm not a good mom, I'm a loser, I'm a procrastinator, I'm lazy, there are people who are doing better than me, no matter what I try, I'm not good at it, my boss isn't happy with me, all of that kind of stuff, you are not bad. And if somebody sort of shamed and blamed that sense of badness into you, criticized that bad sense of badness to you, slapped that sense of badness into you, undoing that sense of badness in the moment can feel really scary, and it's something that we have to mourn. So when we say, I am going to manage my own stress, I'm going to self-regulate, I'm going to use words with my kids, I'm not going to hit my kids, that's really, really hard, because then we have to come up with a whole suite of tools to use to manage our stress that isn't hitting them. And when we realize, oh man, that's a lot of work. I got to figure out all these stress management tools and all these tools of teaching my kids and working with my kids. Like, I got to start from scratch. That's a very scary, intimidating thought. And that's why we have the post-traumatic parenting community, where we can give our kids the normative, healthy childhood that we never had. Because by learning together, by working with each other, by supporting each other as a community, we can change this cycle one kid at a time, one parenting interaction at a time. So if you would like to join the post-traumatic parenting community, please subscribe here so you get notified of new episodes. And please check us out on Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Kozlowitz Psychology. And you can find the Post-Traumatic Parenting podcast wherever you get your podcasts.